I still remember the day I signed my very first loan. I was 22, full of confidence, and I thought I was making the smart move, my ticket into the real world. Nobody told me I wasn't just signing papers. I was fastening a leash around my own neck. And the language itself gives it away. A mortgage? Do you know what that word literally means in French? Death pledge. That's right. You pledge your life away until either you or the debt dies. I wish I were making that up. But there I was, pen in hand, smiling, while the banker across the desk congratulated me for stepping into adulthood. That's how it always goes, doesn't it? They clap for you as you slip on the chains. Because here's the trick. Society loves to dress shackles up as jewelry. Mortgages, student loans, car notes. They call it responsibility. They call it adulthood. They even dare to call it good debt, as if there's such a thing as a beautiful cage. And so we grow up believing debt is not just normal, but noble. We tell ourselves it's an investment. We swallow the story that borrowing for a house or a degree is the same as buying freedom. But if you've ever lived with that weight pressing on your chest month after month, you know the truth. Good debt is just a prettier word for lifelong servitude. And that's where we begin, with the myth of so-called good debt. You see, the idea of good debt didn't just fall out of the sky. It was manufactured, very carefully, very profitably. After World War II, America faced a question. How do you keep an economy running when millions of soldiers return home? The answer was brilliant in its simplicity. Convince everyone that the road to happiness is paved with borrowed money. Banks made mortgages easier to access, the government subsidized loans, and Hollywood went to work, painting the picture of the smiling family in front of the white picket fence. Suddenly, debt wasn't a burden. It was the American dream. And here's the genius stroke. They didn't just market it through billboards. They rewired culture. Parents began to tell their children, go to college, take the loans, get a house, take the mortgage. It's what responsible adults do, and so generation after generation handed down the same story. Not out of malice, but out of trust. My parents said it. Maybe yours did too. They thought they were guiding us into security, not servitude. Debt became a rite of passage. You weren't considered established unless you carried a mortgage. You weren't considered ambitious unless you signed for the student loan. You weren't considered grown unless you wore those golden shackles. But underneath the shine, something darker hid. Every loan signed was a slice of future sold. A promise to trade time you haven't even lived yet for things you may not even need. The myth is seductive because it sounds safe. The truth is dangerous because it asks questions no one wants to answer. If this debt is so good, why does it take half a lifetime to pay back? If it's an investment, why does it leave so many people poorer, not richer? And that's where the mask starts to slip. Behind the slogans, behind the cultural applause, we begin to see what good debt really costs. Not in theory, but in the lived reality of families across the country. Which brings us to a story, a case study, that shows how this myth plays out in real life. Let me paint two pictures for you. The first is a mortgage, the so-called American dream. You buy a house for, let's say, $300,000. Seems manageable, right? 30 years, fixed rate, a smart investment. That's what the banker tells you as he smiles and slides the papers across the desk. What they don't highlight is this. Over the life of that loan, you'll likely pay the bank an extra $200,000 in interest. $200,000. That's not an investment. It's a business model, and you're the product. Now think about the freedom people claim homeownership brings. In reality, it nails your feet to the ground. You want to move for a better job across the country? Well, good luck selling at the right time. The bank doesn't care if the market is down. They'll get theirs. You want to downsize because the kids moved out? Sure. But first, you'll need to negotiate with the invisible partner who actually owns most of your house. For decades, the dream home isn't yours. It's theirs. You're a glorified tenant, except instead of a landlord, you've got a bank wearing a tie and sending you monthly invoices. Now let's shift to the student loan. This one's even trickier, because it comes dressed up as love. Parents proudly tell their kids, go to college, take out loans, it'll pay off later. It sounds noble, almost parental duty. But let's run the numbers. The average American student loan debt is about $30,000. Many owe much more, $50,000, $100,000, even $200,000 if they chased graduate degrees. And here's the kicker. Unlike credit card debt, student loans are nearly impossible to discharge in bankruptcy. You can declare financial death, and still, Sally Mae shows up at the funeral asking for her cut. And the effects? They're everywhere. Millennials are getting married later, buying homes later, having kids later. Why? Because they're still trying to dig themselves out of a hole they were shoved into at 18 with a smile and a pat on the back. Gen Z? They've learned to juggle side hustles, DoorDash, TikTok shops, freelancing, just to cover monthly payments. The dream of education opening doors has quietly transformed into a lifetime of shackles, except this time the shackles come in sleek online portals with your balance displayed in bold red numbers. I've met both sides of this divide while traveling. I remember a young man I met in Lisbon, American, mid-20s, backpack on his shoulders, wide smile. He told me he skipped college, not because he didn't want to learn, but because he didn't want the chain. Instead, he taught himself online, picked up coding, and now freelances while seeing the world. He's not rich, not yet, but he's free. His choices belong to him. Compare that to a woman I spoke with in New York, early 30s, Ivy League graduate, working 80 hours a week at a firm she doesn't even like. She confessed, over a glass of wine, that she feels trapped, not because she lacks talent, but because she carries $120,000 in student loans. She can't take a lower-paying job she might actually enjoy, because the monthly payment doesn't care about her dreams. It only cares about her bank account. That's the brutal contrast. Debt decides who gets to live boldly and who has to bargain with every step. Winners? The ones who dodge the leash, even if it meant unconventional paths. Losers? Not by intelligence, not by ambition, but by a system that convinced them slavery was called responsibility. And yet, society applauds the debtors. Parents beam when their kid gets accepted to a big-name university, even if it means signing a financial death pledge. Friends congratulate couples on buying their first home, never mentioning that half the home belongs to the bank. We treat shackles as jewelry. We toast to chains. But look closely. Every toast is sponsored by someone who profits off it. The bank, the university, the government. They built a story where your debt makes them rich, and your obedience keeps them safe. The case studies aren't about numbers, they're about lives. Lives slowed down, dreams deferred, choices postponed. And the cruelest part? Many never even realize what happened because the culture trained them to call it normal. And that brings us to the real sting, the hidden costs of so-called good debt. Not just dollars and cents, but years, opportunities, and freedom lost along the way. The thing about debt is that its price tag is never written in full. Banks will show you the monthly payment, the manageable number, like a magician distracting your eyes with a shiny coin. But the true costs, financial, emotional, and lifestyle, those hide in the fine print of your life. Start with the obvious, the financial. We already know interest eats you alive. A $300,000 mortgage isn't $300,000. It's $500,000 by the time you're done feeding the bank. That's the clear math. But what they don't put on the calculator is how those dollars bleed into years of your life. How many vacations never taken, businesses never started, chances never risked, because you had to send your extra money to a faceless institution. Then come the emotional costs. Debt doesn't just live in your bank account, it lives in your chest. It shows up as that tightening in your stomach every time you check your balance. It's the resentment you feel toward a boss you can't stand but can't leave, because the mortgage doesn't care about your pride. It's the quiet anxiety of knowing that no matter how hard you work, a piece of your labor belongs to someone else before it belongs to you. And lifestyle, this is where it gets cruel. Debt doesn't just tell you how much to pay, it tells you how to live. Mortgages, for instance, breed immobility. You might get offered your dream job across the country, but wait, you can't just pick up and leave. That house, that neighborhood, that invisible anchor keeps you nailed in place. Psychologically, too. People don't admit it, but once they buy, they stop dreaming as wildly. The house isn't just a home, it's a leash disguised as a picket fence. Student loans, they delay the entire script of adulthood. You can't move out, can't marry, can't take the trip, can't quit the job. Freedom gets rationed out in small bites once a month as you send your payment into the void. I've met 20-somethings who should be burning with adventure, yet they live with the cautiousness of retirees, because the debt taught them fear before life taught them courage. And here's the line that stings the most. Debt doesn't just limit your wallet, it narrows your imagination. You stop asking, "What could I do?" and start asking, "What can I afford to do?" The question changes, and so does the entire trajectory of your life. I remember a man I once met in Chicago, brilliant, talented. He could sketch an idea for a business in a notebook and make you believe in it. But he had a mortgage, 2 car loans, and a pile of student debt. His passion was design, but he worked in insurance, because insurance paid steady, and steady was necessary. He told me, almost whispering, "If it weren't for these bills, I'd be gone tomorrow. I'd chase the work I actually love." That was 10 years ago. Last I checked, he's still in that cubicle, still sketching dreams on the side, still telling himself, "Someday." That's the hidden cost you'll never see in a contract. Not just money lost, but futures stalled. Not just numbers, but years traded for security that was never real in the first place. And here's the cruel irony. The system doesn't care. The bank is paid, the university is paid, the government is paid. The only one not paid is you, paid in freedom, paid in joy, paid in possibility. But there is a way to see through this illusion, a way to recognize the trade before you sign it. And that recognition, That moment of clarity becomes the turning point, the place where illusion begins to crack and freedom starts to look possible again. There's a moment, if you're lucky, when the fog lifts. You look at that loan contract, not as numbers, not as monthly payments, but as something far more chilling, a contract where you've sold off slices of your future life. Think about it. Debt is time travel in reverse. You're not borrowing money from the bank, you're borrowing time from yourself. Hours you haven't lived yet, mornings you haven't woken to, years you haven't grown into, they're already spoken for, signed away. And you won't notice the chains because society polishes them to look like progress. The house with the white fence, the diploma on the wall, polished shackles. I like to think of it this way. Debt is the subscription fee for your own existence. You pay every month just for the right to keep playing the game of life, like some app you can't delete. And the cruel part is, you don't stop paying until the best years of your life have already been consumed. That realization, when it hits, it's like the floor shifting under you. You suddenly see the contract for what it is, not just financial, but existential. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, some people break at that moment. They shrug and say, well, that's just life. But others decide to redraw the terms. They start asking, what if my future is mine again? What if I stop renting my freedom back from the bank? That question, that spark, is where change begins, where debt stops being invisible and starts being redefined. And that takes us to the next step. If debt isn't good, then what is money really? Let's talk about redefinition. Let me ask you something. Is there such a thing as good slavery? It sounds absurd, right? Nobody would proudly say, I'm glad these chains are polished and gold-plated. They're still chains, but they're good chains. Yet when it comes to debt, we've built an entire culture around precisely that logic. Mortgages, student loans, car payments, we slap a ribbon on the handcuffs and call them responsible. But at its core, all debt is the same trade. Future autonomy for present comfort. You exchange your tomorrow for something today. And whether that something is a roof, a diploma, or a shiny new car, the underlying deal doesn't change. You owe pieces of yourself you haven't lived yet. Now, let's step back and reframe the whole thing. Freedom isn't just the absence of chains. It's the ability to move, to choose, to say no. Imagine two neighbors. One has a mortgage and proudly calls himself a homeowner, but in truth, the bank owns 70% of that house. The other saved, bought smaller, and now owns her home outright. Who sleeps more peacefully? Who has the power to walk away from a bad job, or take a sabbatical, or care for an aging parent without fear? Or take education. I've met young people in Europe who graduate debt-free because higher education is subsidized or structured differently. Compare that with an American graduate carrying $80,000 in loans. One enters life unshackled, free to explore careers, take risks, even travel. The other? He calculates monthly payments before he dares to dream. Same degree, radically different freedoms. Debt narrows your choices. Freedom expands them. And that's the contrast worth seeing. Because once you truly absorb that freedom is measured not in square footage or brand logos, but in options, you begin to see debt for what it really is, a thief in plain sight. Different cultures reveal this more clearly. In Japan, debt is often tied to shame. Borrowing too much is seen as dishonorable. In parts of Latin America, families share resources, reducing reliance on formal debt. Meanwhile, in America, we normalize borrowing to the point where a teenager signs away decades of life before they've had a chance to understand what a decade even feels like. We've baptized debt as the American dream. But what kind of dream begins with a chain around your ankle? I've sat across tables in coffee shops, listening to people in their 60s say, "I thought I'd be free by now, but I still owe," and I've seen the opposite. A retired school teacher who paid off her modest home decades ago, now living simply, joyfully, without a single bill hanging over her head. The difference between them wasn't luck, it was definition. One defined debt as inevitable, the other defined freedom as non-negotiable. So let's redraw the lines. Debt isn't good or bad, it's slavery by contract, dressed in respectable clothes. True wealth isn't how much debt you can manage, it's how little of your future you've sold. And here's the key shift. Once you see debt for what it really is, you can begin to imagine an alternative. A life not built on payments, but on presence. Not chained to monthly obligations, but grounded in choices that are yours. And that leads us to the next question. If we reject the illusion of good debt, then what does the alternative path actually look like? Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Escaping the trap of good debt isn't about some secret financial hack. It's about choosing a different road entirely. And yes, it's harder. It means swimming against the current when everyone else is floating downstream, congratulating themselves on how responsible they look with their shiny chains. The first tool is the oldest one. Delayed gratification. Not sexy, but powerful. Instead of rushing into a mortgage because rent is throwing money away, you rent while you build savings. You live smaller, you wait longer, you stack cash. And while your friends are Instagramming granite countertops they technically don't own, you're quietly building freedom. Housing. There are more alternatives than banks want you to believe. You can house hack. Buy a duplex, live in one unit, rent the other, and let tenants help cover the mortgage. You can co-live with friends, split expenses, or even practice geographic arbitrage, choosing to live in a lower-cost city or country where your money stretches further. The dream home can wait, because a dream without chains is worth more than a palace you don't own. Education? Same deal. The myth says you must take on $100,000 in student loans to be successful. That's a lie sold to children. You can start at community college, transfer, graduate debt-free. You can pursue vocational training, plumbers, electricians, coders, welders, careers with six-figure potential and zero student loans. You can apprentice, learn online, build portfolios that matter more than diplomas. I've met people who skipped debt entirely and still out-earned their peers who were buried in it. The common thread here? They rejected the cultural script. They asked a simple, radical question. Do I need to sell my future to prove I'm moving forward today? And here's where it gets inspiring. A couple I met in their late 30s could have bought the suburban palace their realtor drooled over. Instead, they bought a modest home, smaller, older, nothing Instagram-worthy. But instead of pouring every dime into interest payments, they invested the difference. 20 years later, while their peers are still working to pay off the dream, this couple is financially independent. They travel when they want, volunteer when they want, and work only when it brings joy. They didn't buy the biggest house. They bought their freedom. See, the mindset shift is simple but profound. Buy only what you can own outright, because ownership is freedom. Not, what can I afford per month? Not, what will the bank approve me for? But what can I pay for, control fully, and walk away from if I need to? Because debt makes you a hostage. Ownership makes you free. And the beautiful thing is, once you step off the debt treadmill, you realize life doesn't shrink. It expands. You discover joy in low-cost living. You learn that freedom, not granite countertops, is the real luxury. So the alternative path isn't about being cheap. It's about being deliberate. It's about saying, I refuse to sign away decades of my future for a version of success that isn't even mine. And that's where everything shifts. Because once you see that freedom is built, not borrowed, the illusion of good debt starts to crumble. Which brings us to the final question. How do we take all of this and turn it into a new way of living, a transformation that lasts? So here we are. We've walked through the myth, the case studies, the hidden costs. And if there's one truth I want to leave you with, it's this. Good debt is a story, not a truth. A bedtime story told by banks, governments, and even well-meaning parents to make the shackles feel like jewelry. Think about that image for a second. Shackles, polished until they glitter under the light, slipped onto your wrists with a smile. That's what a mortgage is. That's what student loans are. They shine on day one, but every month that bill comes, and with it, another slice of your future sunlight sold off. Here's the emotional gut punch most people avoid. Every loan is a trade. Not just money, but freedom, time, options. When you sign your name, you're not just borrowing dollars. You're renting your future. But imagine, just imagine, what life feels like when the shackles come off. When your paycheck is yours again, not carved up by the bank, not bled out in interest. Imagine waking up knowing that every dollar you make today is a dollar you can point anywhere you choose, toward freedom, toward meaning, toward the life you actually want. That's not theory. That's not some guru's promise. That's the reality of people who dared to question the script, who refused to keep calling change progress. So here's my challenge to you. Question your debts. Don't just ask, what can I afford? Ask, what am I giving up? What is this really costing me? Because once you see the trade clearly, you can start reclaiming your autonomy piece by piece. And that's what this channel, The Bridge Within, is really about. Not just money tips, not quick hacks, but the deeper truths that connect who we are with who we can become. Because every story we tell here is a journey across that inner bridge, between logic and intuition, struggle and growth, knowledge and action. If you're ready to stop renting your future and start owning your freedom, then don't just watch this video. Join me. Hit subscribe and start crossing the bridge within today. Because life is too short to keep polishing shackles. It's time to live unchained.